Oh my God, you guys, holy crap. So I was just editing this video. I'm trying to get this video out as soon as I can. And as I am listening, it dawns on me why it is that Brian Albert did not come out of that house.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor. And I am here breaking down what was the Karen Read case and what now is the Justice for John O'Keefe case. And what a case it is. Not 48 hours after the incredible victory by Karen Read, her family, and this incredible defense team, we have more information flooding out than anybody could even consume so quickly. So we've got multiple jurors speaking out. We've got the Mccabe going on their little tour. We've got Michael Proctor, lead investigator Michael Proctor, doing his damage control. And we've got the attorneys, Alan Jackson, David Yannetti, and Bob Alessi speaking out about their experience in this case. Welcome to the post-Karen Read case. Now, the thing about all of this information is it speaks volumes. It is helping us, those of us who deeply care about seeing justice for Mr. John O'Keefe, about seeing this thing through until the end, no matter what it takes. It gives us an incredible opportunity to continue to fill in lots of the little holes that remain. The defense's case that last week, where we heard from so many incredible professional experts, helped immensely, particularly the testimony of Dr. La Posada, the chief medical examiner formerly from the state of Rhode Island, who has been a witness in countless states across the U.S. and who made clear once and for all, and this diagnostic assessment by Ms. La Posada was aligned with the Commonwealth's expert, Isaac Wolf, who talked about the head injury that John O'Keefe had sustained. Now, what they agreed upon was that John must have experienced a fall backwards due to what is called a coup contra coup injury. And all that really means is that there's bruising inside the brain that comes from the way that somebody is forced backwards and the gravity. So when you are forced backwards and your head hits the ground, your brain inside your skull shoots forward and creates a bruise on the interior part of the brain on the inside, creates bleeding. So because he had sustained that injury, they agreed that he had died from a fall backwards. Dr. La Posada made clear that it likely would have taken a bit of force to propel him backwards, that it was unlikely from just falling the way you might slip and fall. And of course, we already know that due to the injuries that John sustained, on the front of his face, right, to his nose, to his eye or eyebrow, and to the side of his head. So, it is very clear to many of us that he was likely punched and that he fell backwards as a result of being punched. Now, the really important bit of information that we got from Dr. La Posada was not just the coup contra coup injury, and that is the bruising that was evidenced on the back and in the front of the brain that would have occurred from gravity, from the force that John O'Keefe would have sustained hitting his head, and then the brain inside the skull being propelled forward. What happened was the back of his skull, the bottom part was shattered, and the combination of the swelling that was occurring inside of the brain and that collapsed skull caused the brainstem. The brainstem caused the brain and the brainstem to collapse in on themselves, which would have crushed all of the neurons that are responsible for things like respiration and heart rate. That meant that John O'Keefe would have been dead almost immediately. That opinion, by the way, was not just from the defense's medical examiner, Dr. La Posada. It was shared by the Commonwealth's Dr. Isaac Wolf. This means, though, that John O'Keefe was never left out in the cold ever. He wasn't left out to die, not by anybody, not by Karen Reed, and not by anybody in the house at 34 Fairview. What does that mean? It means that John O'Keefe had been dead before he was put outside in the cold. Now, once you understand this, everything else that happens after makes a ton more sense. Everything from Jennifer Mccabe's 911 call, the behaviors from all the folks in the house, including Brian Albert, who didn't come out of his house, and to all of those people that just couldn't imagine how a person like Brian Albert wouldn't have tried to save John O'Keefe, would never have left him to die. They are correct. He did not have to do that because John O'Keefe was already dead. So nobody left John O'Keefe to die in the cold. He was dead. In fact, by the time Jennifer Mccabe stumbles upon that body, and I say Jen Mccabe because she's the person who makes the 911 call and insists on 2 occasions as she's speaking to dispatch that he was dead. I guess he's gone.
Okay, they don't feel comfortable doing so?
No, I think he's passed away.
And now she says it again. She doesn't go near the body. Remember, she does not go near this body. She has gone right to the phone. She's the one that calls 911. That's her designation. The last thing that you're going to do is pronounce them dead. And at that point, he was dead for probably around 6 hours. And the only reason why that was not assessed by the first responders on site is because if there is a suspicion of hypothermia, the body temperature drops. So it's very difficult to tell whether somebody is dead, has passed away, or is suffering from hypothermia. And I believe this to be universal, when first responders stumble upon that type of situation, they are not to be called, that person is not to be determined to be passed away until their body temperature is attempted to return to normal at the hospital. Because people do come back from the dead. They freeze and they come back from the dead. That's the reason why John O'Keefe was not pronounced dead until later that morning. And we get plenty of indicators of that from Jennifer Mccabe, who, by the way, is the world's worst liar and can't help herself but to tell us the truth hidden inside all of her lies in the hours and hours of testimony that Jennifer Mccabe ends up totaling. After we add up both trials, the first trial and the second trial, she spends like a collective 6 days on the stand. So we get an endless amount of information from Ms. Jennifer Mccabe, and all of that gives us a lot of information about what happened to John. So let's take a look now at this interview with ABC that Matt McCabe, Jen McCabe, Brian and Nicole Albert, and Chris Albert sit down and give to Matthew Guttman. All right, so let me start with this. At first, I couldn't figure out why they'd be doing this. I mean, I'm sure they were paid handsomely. Maybe that was a motivating factor. But I have to believe they are aware that there is a much larger army of Karen Reed supporters than there are people that are supporting of them, certainly publicly anyway. And I'm not sure if this is an appeal to the average person who is not familiar with this case, but if you are familiar with this case, then you are also intimately familiar with the evidence and are absolutely sure that Karen Reed did not hit John O'Keefe with her car and therefore could not have killed him because she was not on the scene. Okay. And that's not the only bit of evidence either. I mean, there's nothing but exculpatory evidence of Karen Reed's involvement across the board, but that's not what this conversation is about. We can talk about that a different time. So that leaves the people in the house, and that's the house at 34 Fairview is owned by this man, Brian Albert. So clearly, this is not helping matters. If anything, you would think laying low after the verdict, hoping that this goes away, would be the smarter position, right? Inciting emotion would be the less smart decision, would be the less intelligent choice here, right? Because all this is going to do is make people like me furious and scream and yell even louder. But you also have to keep something very, very important in mind. There is still a case out there, and that is Turtle Boys. So Aidan Carney, who is the journalist that broke the Karen Reed story wide open, and you have to give Turtle Boy tremendous credit. This is a man who has balls of steel and is willing to put himself in these incredible situations to not just ask difficult questions, Barbara Walters style, but to not ever let these people here off the hook. Literally to take a busload of people to their homes with a megaphone and scream and shout, calling them murderers and screaming at them facts from the case, like, for example, Jen McCabe's 2:27 in the morning Google search, or the butt dials, the conversation that Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, who's not here in this interview, that they had around the same time that morning, back and forth, that they both claim were an inadvertent butt dial conversation, the first of its kind ever in the history of the world.
Your testimony was then that you were in an intimate situation, I'll put it that way, with Nicole at the time. And that's how you butt dialed Brian Higgins, correct?
I don't believe I said that's how I butt dialed Brian Higgins.
That's the time.
I think I said there was a time frame that was close.
Okay.
So I didn't say that, no.
What you said was you were in an intimate situation with Nicole at the time that the butt dial occurred, correct?
I'm not sure if you have something you can read me or show me.
Does that refresh your recollection that you indicated at the other hearing that...
Just the first part of that first. Does that refresh your recollection?
It does.
Okay, now you can.
Thank you, Your Honor. Isn't it true that at the other hearing you indicated that at or around the 2:22 time frame, you and your wife were in bed together in an intimate situation?
Yes, around that time, I think it reads.
There's a second call at 2:22 and 52 seconds, 17 seconds later, correct?
Yes.
That call is actually from Brian Higgins to you, isn't it?
Yes.
And that call doesn't last 1 second. That call lasts 22 seconds, correct?
Yes.
If we were to count off 22 seconds, that's an uncomfortably long time, is it not?
No,
It's long enough to have a conversation, isn't it?
I didn't have a conversation.
Is 22 seconds long enough to have a conversation?
No.
A human being can't have a conversation in 22 seconds?
Sure they could. I don't think it's anything of substance.
Okay, so that's my question. Is it 22 seconds long enough to have a conversation?
I don't agree with it, no.
You had an explanation for what that 22-second call may have been and what the prior call may have been, correct?
Yes.
What was your explanation?
Well, I used a phrase that people commonly used as a butt dial.
So you think it's possible that you may have butt dialed Brian Albert for a 22-second call that you're not aware of?
I think it's possible that he could have been inadvertently called back, but I have no recollection of that, nor did I have any conversation with anybody.
So they are doing this to try to convict Aidan Carney. So this is a revenge tour. And they're trying to paint themselves as harassed, as victimized witnesses who were accosted for doing nothing more than coming forward with the truth. So I'll never forget this. It's stuck in my mind always. This was in the summer before my 8th grade year, and I was a little hellion. And me and my friend, in addition to like sneaking around on the railroad tracks in a small town in Massachusetts, smoking cigarettes, we were drinking from these little juice bottles from these 2 concoctions that we had made from stealing from our parents' liquor cabinets. And this was like the most disgusting thing you could find. It was like a whiskey, vodka, like schnapps, like all this garbage mixed together, just the most vile thing you could think to drink. And there was a parade going on in town. So the 2 of us are drinking and we're kind of walking in these big crowds. And I'll never forget it. My friend, his name is Eric Gabriel. He looked at me and he said, "You know, Sam, people only know whatever you tell them." And he said that because he could see that I was anxious that we were going to get caught. But that is the mentality here of Brian Albert. The idea is we'll just double down. We'll present ourselves in a certain way. And if we just keep presenting this way to the world and keep telling this story over and over and over again, nobody can prove otherwise. So that is what Brian Albert is doing here. Now, there's something else you need to know about Brian Albert for those of you that are less familiar with him. He's the fixer in this situation. He's the guy that has helped all these other people with their rehearsed statements. He's the guy that went over the testimony of Jen Mccabe, told her exactly what to say. And that started on the night in question. It's the reason why there was phone conversations going back and forth between Brian Higgins and Brian Albert at 2:00 in the morning. It's the reason why Jennifer Mccabe re-Googles House Long to Die in the Cold at 6:23 that morning after they find John O'Keefe.
So, How Long to Die in Cold result in articles concerning time of exposure. And she says, we never got the chance to read it. But this is what's important here. This use of the word we, she does not see Karen Reed as a friend. So for her to say the word we here, this is wildly and crazily out of place. In my mind, this is just screaming there's not just deception, but there's a big problem here that needs to be looked at. My note here is that she wasn't with Karen when this happened. If I had any say in any of this, I would go back and review the GPS from everyone's phones. I would look at pictures, videos, and try to determine who Jennifer Mccabe was actually standing next to at 6:23, 6:24 a.m. She is working with somebody to try and fix the mistake on her part of Googling at 2:27 in the morning how long it takes to die from exposure.
There's Jennifer Mccabe controlling the narrative. At 6:23 a.m., look at where Jennifer Mccabe is and what she is doing. It's also the reason why at 5:07, as soon as she hangs up with Karen Reed, when Karen Reed calls her to look for John, looking, going, "Do you know where John is?" Because Karen Reed would have known that Jen Mccabe was in the house at 34 Fairview. So she calls Jen Mccabe looking for John. As soon as she hangs up, Jen Mccabe calls over to her sister's house, 5:07. She calls Brian Albert asking, "What the hell should I do?" And at that point, Brian Albert says, "Go to her house," right? Let's control the narrative. Now, great. We're in a position where we get to determine how this whole thing goes, how John O'Keefe's body is found. So you also have to understand that the reason why she was Googling, Jen Mccabe was Googling House Long to Die in the Cold at 2:27 in the morning, is because I got to hand this one. This one, I will say, was quite brilliant on the part of Brian Albert, who I am absolutely sure is the one who came up with this. He figured, knowing as a former Marine and a former first responder, no, actually, at that time, he would have still been a Boston cop. So, as a first responder, as a former Marine, he would have known that if somebody is suspected to be out in the cold, to have suffered hypothermia, they cannot be pronounced dead. And it was a genius decision on the part of Brian Albert. And that is the reason why Jen McCabe is Googling how long to die in the cold.
Given the timestamp of 2:27 and 38 seconds on January 29th for that Safari suspended state tab with the It's Raining Men, what did that tell you about the timing of when It's Raining Men was accessed by the user?
Yeah, well, so the indications would be that that tab was brought up and then went away from to do another tab. So it can happen less than a second. It doesn't take long to open up a tab and start a new tab. Can be done very quickly.
I'm not really phrasing this the right way to get what I want. What I want is the timing of the interaction with It's Raining Men.
I see.
iPhone user. When did that happen?
Well, certainly, all the activity that we have is all prior to the recording of this that timestamp in the browser state.
All right. Now, with regard to this particular example where the browser state DB is the last entry, so the activity happened before, was that unique on this phone, or were there many examples of this?
No, I found many examples of this exact behavior.
What he is saying is that there were dozens of examples where Jen opened up Safari, looked at whatever was on the screen, and then hit new tab. Because the state of this YouTube tab that he's showing us just before the alleged 227 Google search, the Safari Google search, was exactly that. It had been opened for like a second, and then a new tab was opened instead of, in other words, closing that YouTube tab. She just opened up a new tab to start something else. And there were dozens and dozens of examples of that exact behavior elsewhere.
Do you have an opinion as to the timing of that first search for how long to die in cold?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
That would have happened at or before January 29, 2022 at 2:27:40 a.m. in the morning.
And what is the basis for your opinion?
Again, by how this particular phone operates with that exact operating system and comparing it to other data on that phone and the way it presented it out itself is all consistent with that search happening at or before that time.
The question was, at what point should we put John O'Keefe's body outside? Because at what point would it be viable to pretend to assume that he died from hypothermia? So that is the purpose of that Google search. So you'll notice, at least in the clips that we've seen, Brian Albert is in charge. And you feel that, right? It's not a coincidence that he's the one seated right in the middle. He's in charge of this group. You should also know that Brian Albert is the oldest of 7 children. He is the patriarch of his own family, of which he has 5 children. And so this is a very close family. They have all been born and raised, and most of their children remain in Canton, Massachusetts also. Okay, so the purpose of this whole charade is to try to convict Turtle Boy, to put Aidan Carney in jail. And with that, we will continue.
And it's very, very sad.
For the first time, some of the key players in the Karen Read trial sitting down for...
You'll also notice that a lot of what they say is true. It is very sad, Nicole. This is a very sad situation. The problem is it's hard to feel bad for these people because they put themselves in this situation and they didn't have to. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
For an exclusive interview. His friend, Jennifer Mccabe, and her husband, Matt, former Boston Police Sergeant Brian Albert, and his wife, Nicole, and his brother, Chris Albert. All five of them pulled into the center of this high-profile case and now speaking out.
I also want to add something that Matt Guttman here leaves out, which is that Nicole Albert and Jennifer Mccabe are sisters. That's an important detail for those who are not aware of the details of this case.
And I think the reason we all stayed quiet is because we were just witnesses. This is a thing that we had nothing to do with.
We did the civic duty, came and told the truth, and that's it.
Free Karen Reed! Right, so you see how they're trying to paint themselves as witnesses. We're just witnesses. We didn't do anything wrong. We're just witnesses. And they can say that until they're blue in the face. The problem with that is they're not just witnesses. They are absolutely not just witnesses. And it's a little harder to say now because none of them, with the exception of Jennifer Mccabe, was called into the second trial. So while these people all testified in the first trial, none of them were even brought into the second trial. Jen Mccabe is the only person that became the spokesperson in the second trial from that house, from the McAlbert family.
It's the case that has captivated the country and divided a town. Karen Reed, accused of killing her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe, hitting him with her SUV and leaving him to die in a blizzard.
Correction. That's an old story, and it's very important if you care about this case and you care about seeing justice for John O'Keefe, that you stop spreading that message. John O'Keefe was not left out in the cold by anyone, not Karen Reed and not anybody in the house, because John O'Keefe was dead hours by the time he is discovered at 6 a.m.
Not guilty. Not guilty.
Now, after a second trial, a jury acquitting her of the most serious charges, second-degree murder and manslaughter. And hundreds of supporters in pink, Karen Reed's favorite color, cheering as the verdict came down yesterday.
I also want to say something, having been there this week. I was there on Monday. I got to give the town of Dedham some credit here, because the building across from the courthouse, the Registry of Deeds, basically allowed us to just take it over completely. Like, I mean, we were in and out of the bathroom in this office. We took over the front, the stairs, and they just let us do it. And you have to give them a shout out because we were all over. I mean, the town was just mobbed. And as the days went on during jury deliberations, more and more people were there taking over the town. So you have to give the town of Dedham some credit for allowing Karen Reed's supporters to just take it over. So I appreciate that. Thank you, the town of Dedham, for letting us do that.
I could not be standing here without these amazing supporters.
People turned this thing into a tailgate party, it looked like some days. Board games, cornhole, cookouts.
One thing I want you to know about Brian Albert that I am learning, he's a wise ass. And he does this thing where he interjects humor with a very serious face. So the feeling that you're left with is like, well, he can't be joking because it would be so inappropriate to place a joke here, but that's what he does. And he does it on a number of occasions, both throughout his testimony, during the trial, the first trial, and here in this interview. So this is, you know, him sort of mocking the Karen Reed supporters, but doing it very straight-faced. And this is part of the character of Brian Albert. Yeah, that's all I'll say there.
Tailgate party, it looked like some days. Board games, cornhole, cookouts. This is a guy that was murdered, and it's atrocious for that family.
While the prosecutors...
And I want you to also keep in mind something here. As he doubles down on the lie that they had nothing to do with John's death, he is also, or this group of people, has made every effort to keep John O'Keefe's family close. And it's really sad. It's really sad. It's like, can you imagine? You know, people have asked me, do you think Peg O'Keefe will wake up and realize that Karen's innocent? And the answer to that is no, not only because she's completely, brainwashed or whatever you want to say, completely convinced, I guess, but because at this point, to believe that the people in the house are responsible would actually be scary, would actually feel like a threat to her safety, because the folks in the house, Jen Mccabe, for example, has gone to such incredibly great lengths to try to keep Peg specifically very close, and so close that when the FBI shows up at Jen McCabe's house after she gets home from dropping her children off at school, she sees that there are FBI agents in her driveway. She first tells them that she is somebody else, that she's her sister, that she's not Jen McCabe, because they ask her, are you Jennifer McCabe? No, I'm not. They then call her. She answers and she says, oh, give me 10 minutes and then you can come in. She says, I have to brush my teeth or whatever.
The agents asked you. We go this one more time, then I'm going to move on. The agents asked you, in fact, did you contact anyone between the time we called you and set up the interview and the 10 minutes before we walked in the door? They asked you that question, correct? Is that correct?
At that moment, I said no, yes.
At that moment?
No, that moment, because they've just come in my house.
Only one person can talk at a time.
You said the word no, correct?
She was finishing her answer.
I had said no, because I was in a situation where there two officers from a different agent had come in, were asking me questions, or they had said, can I come in and ask you questions? At first I thought they were selling something, then they identified themselves. I just dropped my kids off at school. Going to be completely honest, I hadn't brushed my teeth. So I kind of made some phone calls.
So next question.
Thank you. Ms. McCabe, after you said no, that you hadn't contacted anybody else, those two law enforcement officers from that separate agency who had told you it was a crime to lie to them, they left, correct?
Yes.
Subsequent to that, Mr. McCabe, your husband, objection.
Sustained.
They left you their card so you could call them if need be, correct?
Yes, they did.
And you in fact did call them back, correct?
Yes, I did.
Without telling me the content of the conversation you had, did you have a conversation with Mr. McCabe? Objection.
Sustained.
Did you call them back and say, I'm calling you back because my husband told me that I lied to you, and I better clear that lie up?
So sustained. Jurors, remember I told you before that only answers to questions are evidence? Be mindful of that. Next, yes.
You ultimately called these officers back, correct?
Yes.
And you explained to them that you had been untruthful with them, correct?
I explained that I had forgotten to mention a couple people that I had reached out to.
You had forgotten.
I contacted Matt.
Let's go through them.
Yeah.
Yes,
I know 4 off the top of my head.
Okay, let's go through them.
Okay.
You contacted your husband, correct?
Yes.
You contacted Gary Roberts, correct?
Yes.
You contacted Peggy O'Keefe, correct?
Yes.
Then, Ms. McCabe, you contacted the district attorney's office, correct?
My witness advocate.
The district attorney's office.
My witness advocate who works for the district attorney's
Thank
office.
you, Ms. McCabe.
Yes.
And you also left out that you contacted Brian Albert himself, correct?
Yes, my brother-in-law.
For some reason, your brother-in-law, who's the 30-year Boston police detective, correct?
Yes.
And on whose lawn John O'Keefe was found dead or dying. Objection.
I'll allow that.
Correct?
Yes.
I mean, unsurprisingly, she calls Brian Albert because Brian Albert is the person that she goes to for direction. I mean, this entire way, the whole time, Jen McCabe seeks direction from Brian Albert. So, of course, the feds show up, she's going to call him. But she calls Peg O'Keefe. And that shows you how much, to what great lengths this family has gone to try to keep Peg O'Keefe close. And in my guess, I'm guessing on this, it's because this way the thinking was, well, if the feds got to Peg O'Keefe and sat her down and showed her the evidence that we did this, she won't talk to me, or she'll scream and yell, right? She'll either won't answer my call or she'll scream and yell. So the first thing she does is call her to find out whether or not, these guys are about to arrest her, or why they're there, what they want, if anybody else has been interviewed, and all of that.
Blamed Reed for O'Keefe's death. The defense said this group of family members framed Reed to cover up what really happened that night. Ever since, their lives becoming open season for endless conspiracy theories.
What they've done is they've dehumanized us to the sense where we're not real people. We're almost like caricatures.
All right, let me stop here. Chris Albert does not personally have direct involvement that any of us are aware of. His son is Colin Albert.
Oh, fucking please, before I hit your shit, before I run your shit, before I fucking chug a beer and hit that shit.
Karen Reed's lawyers have been aggressively cross-examining prosecution witness Colin Albert, the nephew of the owner of the Canton property where John O'Keefe was found in January of 2022. Albert is seen in a photo which was taken less than a month after the incident in Canton when O'Keefe died. His knuckles on his right hand are bruised. Now, yesterday, Colin Albert testified that he was at the house on the night in question, but never saw John O'Keefe. Also, on cross-examination this morning, Colin Albert told the jury that he has known the lead state police investigator in this case, Trooper Michael Proctor, since he was a child.
He was not at the house when John was there, so I drove him home.
But why would it matter if he was inside and John O'Keefe was killed outside by Karen Reed? Why did he call Erin Beatty, a girl he wasn't dating, out of the blue at 12:33? Why did his family try to silence the Beattys? Why did his mother offer Proctor a thank you gift?
That's right. Have you solemnly swear the evidence here, the court and jury in the case now and hearing to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. You indicated on cross-examination you've never been in a fight.
No.
Indicating that you have no violent tendencies and no violent proclivities, correct?
Nope.
You stand by that testimony?
Correct.
Yo, you're Benton's boys. I will beat all your asses. I promise you, I will fuck you all up. Pull up, bitch. You're a bitch, bro. Fuck you. Yeah, fuck you, pussy. Be cool, boy. You be knocked out. KO. Bang, bang.
That I would beat them up.
Did you say you would beat them up, or did you say, I will fuck you up?
I said I will F you up.
No, you didn't say, I will F you up. What did you actually say?
That I would fuck them up.
You also said something about beating somebody's ass, right?
Correct.
What did that mean?
That I would beat them up.
So when you said, I will fuck you up and I will beat your ass, was that a friendly invitation?
No.
That was a threat, correct?
I don't know if I would call it a threat.
Don't?
I'm not sure.
Someone walks up to you. I'm not going to do it. But if someone did, walked up to you and said, I will fuck you up. I will beat your ass. You wouldn't take that as a threat?
If they walked up to me, yeah.
But if they didn't walk up and just shouted it across the street, and stood there and said, I will fuck you up, I will beat your ass. That's not a threat.
I'm not sure.
Objecting. Were you threatening these Advantage Boys guys, whoever they are?
Yeah, kinda.
Were you threatening them with violence?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah. In addition to Brian and Nicole Albert, you're also very close with Chris and Julie Albert, correct?
Yes.
And the one person who we know has perjured himself, it's not a question, it's not even like a funny gray line. We 100% know commit perjury was Colin Albert, and Bev is protecting him, has made it so he can't be one of the third-party culprits in this case.
This will be the first statement of its kind in my dozen years as Norfolk District Attorney. The harassment of witnesses in the murder prosecution of Karen Reed is absolutely baseless. It should be an outrage to any decent person, and it needs to stop. Innuendo is not evidence. False narratives are not evidence. However, what evidence does show is that John O'Keefe never entered the home at 34 Fairview Road in Canton the night he died. Location data from his phone, recovered from the lawn beneath his body when he was transported to the hospital, shows that his phone did not enter that home.
The data centers on a location slightly closer to the house than the roadside.
although several records show the same center coordinate with differing accuracy radii. Some of these location records are shown in the map below in white. So let's go down and look at what you had in your report for the area in white. In the area in white that you're referring to, there are two white circles, the largest one there. This, in fact, was a depiction that you included in your report on page 29, correct?
Correct.
Interesting and notable, you did not include that depiction in your timeline that you discussed with the jury yesterday, did you?
I did not know.
But it was important enough for you to put that depiction in your report, correct?
Correct.
And notably, the larger white circle covers a substantial amount of the house at 34 Fairview, correct?
Correct.
11 people have given statements that they did not see John O'Keefe enter the home at 34 Fairview that night. Some have, without any evidence, pointed to 18-year-old Colin Albert, a nephew of the homeowner, and accused him of attacking John O'Keefe as he entered the home. But phone evidence shows O'Keefe never entered the home at all. Testimony from witnesses tell us that 18-year-old Colin Albert had left his uncle's home before John O'Keefe and Karen Reed had arrived outside the residence. There was no fight inside that home. John O'Keefe did not enter the home. Colin Albert, the young man being vilified, was not present when Reed's vehicle and John O'Keefe arrived on the street. This is a false narrative.
Just to be clear, and I'm going to do this slowly, Brian Albert's younger brother is Chris Albert, correct?
Yes.
Chris Albert is married to Julie Albert.
Yes.
You consider Chris and Julie family, even though there may not be a blood relation as well, correct?
Yes.
Chris Albert is a Canton Select Board member, is that right?
Now he is, yes.
This guy who was a pizza shop owner just so happens to be a part of the group, a part of the body, the selectman for the town, who then has jurisdiction over the police. And when the town was voting or insisting that there be an independent audit on the police department because of this case, guess who voted against that? And he was overruled because so many people in the town insisted there be an independent audit. Chris Albert, if you have children, what would you do to protect them from going to prison for the rest of their lives for something that they did, probably blackout drunk, the one time they make a mistake, they do something stupid in a blackout drunk episode? What would you do? And how would you go about protecting your child from the possibility of a life in prison? If moving far away wasn't an option, which it is not for the Alberts and the McCabes, they're not leaving town. They're not moving to the other side of the country. That's not their style. No way, right? Brian Albert has 6 siblings. He's the oldest of 7, right? I mean, how many Alberts, how many cousins do these kids probably have? There's no way they're leaving town. So what's the alternative option? Oh, I know. Put key members of my family in positions of power to ensure that nobody ever gets close to my child. Build a wall of protection around them. Keep them close and make sure and use every bit of leverage and power that I have, that I've built, that my family has built in the town that we've had for generations of our family have grown up in, to make sure that my child avoids prison. And that is what tethers him to this case. That's why he is there, because Chris sees himself as the defender of Colin. Like, in order to get to my son, you got to come through me.
Clearly, you have a lot of ties to the city of Canton. Would you agree?
Sure.
You live there?
Yes.
You work there?
Yes.
You have family
Okay.
there?
Yep.
You raised
Okay,
your kids
everybody
there?
wait. Hold on.
Yeah.
All right. Notice he's rocking himself. Notice the rocking. His shoulders are going back and forth. That's behavior that he's using to try to calm himself down, right? What do we do when we're trying to calm a baby down? We rock the baby, right? So just notice the body language. Notice the eyes. Notice that he's tensing up, right? And so he's trying to calm himself down.
And you also are a town selectman in the city of Canton. Or
Recently elected.
the town of Canton, I should say.
It's a town, correct.
And not only that, but your brother, Kevin Albert, is a police officer in Canton?
He is.
Your brother, Brian Albert, with whom you grew up, is currently retired, but had been a Boston police officer who lived in Canton, correct?
Correct.
As a town selectman, you have some power, do you not?
I'm one of 5 selectmen.
And as a police detective, Kevin Albert has some power, does he not?
Objection.
Sustained.
And you also have close friends on the Canton Police Department, do you not?
Objection.
I'll allow that.
I have some.
Now, you know that Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael Proctor is the lead investigator on this case, correct?
I know that. I've known him for.
About 15 years or so?
Roughly.
All right. Who is Kenneth Berkowitz?
The former Canton police chief.
And how do you know him?
His son and my son are the same age, so they played on some sports teams when they were younger together, I think.
All right. So let me just also point out that Kenneth Berkowitz is one of the police. So he was the police chief at the time of this incident, but he was also one of the people that just was driving around, happened to be driving past 34 Fairview and found more taillight pieces. Oh, how about that?
I believe that's my fundraiser for when I was running for the select board, that event that I spoke of earlier.
You would agree with me that one of your functions as a selectman is to oversee public safety in the town?
Yes.
And you would agree that the police department is a key component of public safety in the town of Canton?
Yes.
Look at that. Look at that. Okay. Did you see all that moving around? Did you see the scratching of his face? Do you see? He knows this question is coming. He's prepared for this question. And he can't control himself. I'm telling you, one thing you start to learn when you are learning about lie detection is that unless you're a sociopath, it's incredibly difficult for people to lie. This is me interrupting your programming to remind you to like this video right now. And don't forget to subscribe. Like this video. So in Chris's thinking at that time, how am I going to stay local in town and protect my son? That was on the list of ways that he could do that. And so he runs for local government and ends up getting on the town select committee. And that is all after John O'Keefe's passing.
To the sense where we're not real people. We're almost like caricatures. We're pawns.
Chris is very contrite about this death. He was the one who was the closest with John because they were neighbors at the time. They did have problems because Chris and Julie Albert have 3 sons, and they were a little disrespectful. Colin Albert is a punk kid, and they would walk through John O'Keefe's yard as a shortcut. And John was very he was very, what's the word, anal retentive about his things. He liked his lawn a certain way. He liked no shoes in the house, and he was anal retentive about it. But this became like an inside joke amongst the Chris Albert family. So much so that they had dubbed him
Get off my lawn! Oh, trespasser! Do you want to be eaten alive? No! Then get out of here!
Can you explain for the jury who or what is Nebercracker?
What is Nebercracker?
Yes.
Oh, get off my lawn!
Like the character?
That's what I'm asking.
It's a character in a cartoon called Monster House.
And would you agree with me that Nebercracker in the movie Monster House was this kind of old curmudgeon who didn't want anybody on his lawn, correct?
The character, yes.
He was the get off my lawn guy, correct?
In the movie, yeah.
What was your nickname and your wife Julie's nickname for John O'Keefe?
Mr. Nebercracker.
All right. And your wife Julie actually had John O'Keefe plugged into his contacts as Nebercracker, correct?
Correct.
In fact, you were there one time when Julie showed Karen Reed, her phone to show how John O'Keefe was plugged in as Nebercracker, correct?
I believe so.
And this whole nickname started because of a conflict that Colin Albert had with John O'Keefe. Correct?
Not correct.
So the words not correct, we have not heard, which means the answer is correct in all likelihood.
Complained to you about things that Colin was doing.
Not correct.
He would tell you that Colin used to throw beer cans or beer bottles in his bushes, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, you can answer that. What's your answer to
That is not correct.
John O'Keefe
probably
told
is
you
correct.
that Colin.
So now what we have here from Chris is he is locked in. He is doubling down on lying about there having been issues between Colin and John. So now we know for certain that there were issues between Colin and John. This entire testimony, Chris has been joking about how much John was OCD about the lawn, how he didn't want anybody on the lawn, right? He texts him and he says, I'm going to fuck up your lawn if you don't get over here. Now he's saying he doesn't know whether or not he liked his children cutting through the lawn. We know for sure that's a lie. So now we know he's lying. You understand what I'm saying? This is a lie. It's a stupid thing to lie about. Just say, yeah, he didn't like it. Who cares? Who cares unless you're trying to actively obfuscate the truth? You're trying to tell everybody there's nothing to see here, ladies and gentlemen. This man right now is lying. He's bold-faced lying. And we know he's lying because we know that he knows John didn't want his kids traversing through his lawn. And this has become the family joke.
With regard to that first photo,
Come on, that's funny.
Well, first of all, whose house is that in the background?
That's John's.
Wife Julie on the left?
Correct.
We have the second photo, please.
It's funny. It is funny. Oh my God.
Okay.
That's
that is
funny.
also
Okay.
John's house in the background there.
Correct.
And again, that's you on the right and Julie on the left, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can take that photo down. To the text that you sent him on January 28th when you were trying to get him to come out and you threatened to, quote, fuck up his lawn if he didn't come out that night.
So there was a beef, if you will, between the children, Chris Albert's kids, and John O'Keefe. But Chris and John were friendly, both because John would go in with his nephew to the pizza shop. And it's Chris Albert who ultimately texts John to come to the bar where they were that night, to come to the Waterfall bar. Like, for a guy who's so scared, he's always at his pizza shop. Like, anybody at any time can just go see Chris Albert, because despite what you might think, which is, oh, he's probably got some kid working the front, he does not. Right? He's got like sports radio playing all day, and it's like a regular New York kind of style pizza shop. Actually, it's kind of an endearing place. This girl was kind enough to email me this really funny story about how they went to Canton. They did the same tour that my sister and I did. After talking to him for a while, he brings it up. He ends up saying to them, like, do you know who I am? You know, do you know the story? And he ends up telling them about it, right? So as much as he wants to say that, oh, this is, such a terrible thing and it's made us all victims, and I'm sure in some ways that's true, it's also something that he's clearly made every effort to exploit. So this, I have to just call a spade when I see it. And I know this little song and dance here to be bullshit.
People, we're almost like caricatures. We're pawns.
Have each of you been called murderers? Like actual murderers?
Oh, yeah, on a daily basis.
Anybody who's touched this case has been called a murderer at some point.
All right, so this is a fascinating little discussion here. First of all, they're called murderers because they are responsible for the death of John O'Keefe. Not all of them, obviously. Everybody in this group has different levels of culpability. I actually don't think anyone in this group is directly responsible for his death. I think Brian Higgins is the one that actually, beat John up and caused the fall. But Brian Albert is the fixer. He's the one who says to Brian Higgins, just get out of here. I'll take care of it. And that's why Brian Higgins goes directly to the Canton PD. You also have to know that Brian Higgins used the Canton PD to crash in Canton on nights when he would get really drunk and didn't want to drive back to wherever he was living at the time. But on this night, the reason he goes to dispatch, which is the first place we see him walk into when he goes to the police station, is to find out whether Brian Albert was going to rat him out, because he wasn't sure. So he goes to the Canton PD, goes right into dispatch, and he's hanging out there for a period of time.
Do you recognize the person in this video?
It appears to be Mr. Brian Higgins.
Okay. And what is he wearing? Describe it for the jurors.
Black sweatshirt with some sort of logo on the front. It appears to be blue jeans and shoes with a white trim.
What do you see in that video?
It appears to be an individual wearing a black beanie hat, black dark colored sweatshirt with some design on it, and something illuminating by his face.
Can we enhance the time, please? What time is that?
It says 1:34 and 53 seconds.
To try to see, like, did Brian Albert do me dirty? Did he call this in on me? And he doesn't. And he didn't, right? Now, we know that Brian Higgins is on the phone at 1:30 in the morning at the police station. I will go out on a ledge and say it's very possible that he's talking to Brian Albert. We don't know that for sure.
And Brian Higgins, who's the ATF agent that was in the house, signed a proffer agreement, and he sat down with FBI agents and a U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney, and gave a proffer. And during the federal proffer, Brian Higgins admitted to destroying his cell phone and tearing up his SIM card because he was told to do so by Michael Morrissey, the DA. And he also said, Morrissey told Brian Albert to do the same thing.
But on the stand, so he lies and says he's not spoken to anybody on the phone.
Oh, yeah, on a daily basis.
Anybody who's touched this case has been called a murderer at some point.
Now, this is interesting. Matt McCabe is so intolerant of the idea that he's responsible for this murder that he is using distance here. He's trying to say, well, we're not murder. I mean, anybody who's even gone near the case has been called a murderer, right? He's trying to say, I mean, I'm not a murderer. Anybody, we're all murderers, right? That's called distancing. That is what he's doing here, which I think is kind of funny. He just can't tolerate, the culpability that he actually has. And he has a fair amount of culpability. These people all know what really happened to John. This is not only a criminal conspiracy, being an accessory after the fact, trying to frame somebody else, accusing somebody else of his murder. I mean, Matt Mccabe got on the stand and lied his face off about what really happened that night. So he has a fair amount of culpability.
And anyone who's friends with us support cop killers.
Well, that's true. I mean, unfortunately, you are cop killers, and that sucks for you, but it is the truth of the matter, and that's the truth. I mean, these people are responsible for John's death. This is a very cute picture, by the way.
For 3+ years, the saga wrapped up yesterday. Reed captured celebrating at dinner with her father, and today seen walking with her attorney, Alan Jackson.
I didn't even know I'd be here today, so I had no plans.
Meanwhile, O'Keefe's family and friends struggling with the verdict.
I'm just sad for John's family and what happened yesterday, and I feel like they didn't get justice for him, and our lives just changed forever.
Why speak out now after the verdict?
We took what we thought was the high road. Right. Let the court do its job.
After a night of hanging out at a local bar in a brutal 2022 blizzard, Brian and his wife Nicole hosted a late-night gathering at their home. An invitation had been extended to Reed and O'Keefe, but Brian Albert says neither of them ever entered his home that night.
This is February 1st at 12:50.
So this is about 3 days after the event in question.
So Brian Albert is telling us that Julie told him Channel 4 is in D&E. D&E is a sub shop that is owned by Chris Albert. This is from Matt Mccabe to myself, my sister Nicole, and Brian.
Can you read it for us, please?
Sure. Eating, I assume. Ask Chris to ask some questions. Tell him the guy never went into the house. Yes.
And what does Brian Albert respond?
Exactly.
O'Keefe was found lying unconscious in the snow of Albert's front lawn. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. The defense's theory? A violent altercation at the Alberts' home, possibly involving other members of law enforcement.
Did John ever come in the house?
Never. No.
You never saw John O'Keefe in the house, right?
Never.
Never. Never.
Yeah. So for those people who are interested in lie detection, using never in this context is extraordinarily problematic and is indicative of a lie, right? So it is appropriate to use the term never. If I ask you, have you ever been skydiving? And you say, no, I've never been skydiving. That would be an appropriate use of the term never. This, did John and Karen come into the house? Never. That is not the appropriate use of the term never. What the correct answer to this question is and is no.
These are people in your own community who believe the conspiracy theories, who believe that there were other law enforcement officials and agents involved in this. Why is it people in your own community who believe these conspiracy theories?
FYI, you'll note that Matt Guttman does not get an answer to this question. He gets a deflection and a reframing from Brian Albert. So let's hear the question again.
And agents involved in this. Why is it people in your own community who believe these conspiracy theories?
You do realize for this conspiracy to be true, it would take 30 to 50 people. You'd have to have multiple cops on 2 different police departments, multiple civilians, the medical examiner, firemen.
Okay, this is just the rehearsed statement by Brian Albert that he thinks sounds true, that he thinks makes him sound not culpable. It does not take 30 to 40 people to be involved in a conspiracy. All it takes is the people in this house to double down and lie, making it very simple, saying he never came into the house. Tell him the guy never came into the house. That was their rehearsed statement that they were going to stick to no matter what. There's 2 separate camps in this case that you need to understand in order to understand this case, right? There's the police that investigated the case from the Massachusetts State Police and the Canton cops who showed up and were the ones that did the original investigation, because the Massachusetts State Police couldn't get there easily, number one, because of the snowstorm. But number two, they did not know John O'Keefe was dead from the start. So originally, this was investigated by the local cops because it wasn't a homicide yet, or it wasn't an unattended death yet. Right. So at that point, because John was not pronounced dead, MSP, the Massachusetts State Police, were not called in until a little bit later. And they, consequently, Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, and his partner, Yuri Buchanan, don't ever go to 34 Fairview on that day. Okay, so you got to separate them from the people in the house. People in the house are part of a little family conspiracy. And the people that conspiracy includes, if we want to use that word, although I caution to stay away from it, they include the folks that are at the meeting, the Minion meeting in the 7:00 a.m. hour after the cops clear the scene. John O'Keefe's at the hospital. Carrie, Karen, they're gone. Carrie Roberts is not part of a conspiracy. She's an honest, generally human who believes Karen Reed is guilty largely because of the influence of Jennifer Mccabe. So the people that are part of what we might consider the conspiracy, or the people in the house who know who killed John, include this group here: Kevin Albert, who are Brian and Chris Albert's younger brother, and who was also a police detective in Canton. Notably, he had been suspended because he got drunk with lead investigator Michael Proctor and lost his badge and his gun when they were investigating a case out in Cape Cod. So Julie Albert, who is Chris's wife, was at that meeting. So those are the folks that are at the Minion meeting.
EMTs, you name it. That's how preposterous and silly this is. And great question. I don't understand how people bought this.
Brian Albert says he and Nicole only found out about John's death when Jen Mccabe, who is Nicole's sister, barged into their bedroom.
She was just upset, and I immediately thought something had happened to one of her children or one of my children.
Right. So this is Nicole's rehearsed statement. You know, this is what she knows she's supposed to say. I immediately thought something happened to one of her children and one of my children, because these two are expecting us to believe, and they really expect you at home listening to this, you to believe that Brian Albert, a 30-year veteran of the Boston Police Department, who was a former Marine and the eldest of 7 children, 5 boys, 1 sister, he wants you to believe. And this, by the way, is his parents' home. This is the childhood home. The house that we're talking about at 34 Fairview, that wasn't his house. That was the house he took from his parents, okay? It's his parents' property that he lives in with his 5 children and his wife. Brian Albert wants us to believe that the cavalry shows up on his front lawn and nobody wakes up. He doesn't know they're there. He also expects us to believe that they have a 90-pound German Shepherd sleeping underneath, right at the window that overlooks the flagpole where John O'Keefe is found.
You owned a dog at the time, correct?
Yes.
A German Shepherd named Chloe.
Yes. Mix.
Describe that dog as being not great with strangers. Isn't that true?
I did describe it that way, yes.
You testified that, quote, it started barking because it realized that people were downstairs, end quote, right?
Yes.
But she did bark that night, right?
Yes.
And the reason that you gave under oath for why she started barking was because there were people downstairs knowing about, right?
Yes.
So in that instance, on January 29th, in the early morning hours, she was barking because she heard people.
Well, I can't say why she was barking.
Well, you did say why she was barking.
I let her out to use the bathroom, so I think that's probably why.
Except your testimony was it started barking because it realized there were people downstairs. Those are your words, Mr. Albert.
Right. Okay.
Do you stand by those?
Yes.
Okay. And then you allowed her to stay downstairs and you monitored her with the others who were in the house. Isn't that right?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you testified in that state grand jury, the same April grand jury, April of 2022. So I let it go out to the bathroom. I let it back in. I kind of monitored it a little because we usually don't have people over the house, and the dog's not great with strangers, period. So I was just making sure that the dog was all right with the people that were over, end quote, correct?
Yes.
Do you see the windows that you just described servicing your bedroom on that graphic?
Yes.
Are they right there?
Yes.
Okay, upper left, 2 windows, correct?
Yes.
Your German Shepherd was 6 feet from the window, correct?
I don't know that for sure.
That's where a mat was.
Well, that doesn't mean that's where she always is. She also sleeps in the closet area sometimes.
Oh, so now Chloe's in the closet.
I didn't say she was in the closet. I said she sleeps in the closet area sometimes.
Was she sleeping in the closet area that morning?
I don't remember.
Likelihood is she's sleeping on that mat 5 or 6 feet from that window, correct?
Judge, I don't know.
And we are being led to believe Karen Reed screaming and yelling, running around the lawn, multiple police officers, firefighters, multiple fire trucks. We're being led to believe that Brian Albert did not know this was happening. And it was only until the scene was cleared that he finds out, because Jen storms in his bedroom to tell him. Now, really think about that. Really think about what I'm saying. We're also being led to believe that Jennifer Mccabe pulls up, sees a man who appears to be possibly dead on the front lawn of her sister's home, who she alleges to be very close to, and Brian Albert, who she's known since kindergarten. Okay. And does not go into the house. Doesn't go into the house. Doesn't go into the house to get blankets, try to warm him up, which now makes perfect sense because, of course, Jen McCabe knew he was dead. Right. But when you're trying to figure out this man is, allegedly unconscious in the snow from hypothermia, you're not going to run in the house, turn on all the lights, scream and yell, I need blankets, somebody come help, Brian, come help. I mean, do you understand how absurd that is? And when asked about this on the witness stand, her responses are disgraceful, and it's embarrassing to even see her try to answer these questions this way.
You said there's a man in the snow. Do you know why you chose those words?
I think I just wanted to get out the most specific details. So a man in the snow versus, John O'Keefe and into a story. I think I just was get the details to them as fast as possible to get help there to him as fast as possible.
When you arrived at the scene, you didn't go in? Not until much later, correct?
Our focus was John.
You knew that Brian Albert was inside the house. You'd just been with him hours earlier, correct?
Yes.
You knew that his window was 30 feet away. You're staring at it. You could look at it if you wanted to, correct?
It's off to an angle.
And you didn't go in the house then either?
I did not know.
You knew that John O'Keefe was clinging to life during those precious minutes and seconds. Is that right?
I did, yes.
And you also knew that Brian Albert, your brother-in-law, was a first responder trained to deal with people in that kind of distress, correct?
In that moment, my only thoughts were John and everything we could do for John.
And you knew that there were warm blankets inside the house. Is that right?
I did, yes. There were warm blankets in the house.
And you still never went in, did you?
No, I went and attended to John because once I finished calling 911, I went over to John and Kerry Roberts asked me to take over compressions. So I felt like that was more important and 911 was on the way. I never thought about going in the house. I just thought, how can I help John?
You never thought about going in the house, but you did pull out your cell phone and make 2 phone calls, didn't you?
After I called 911, I tried calling my sister, yes.
While John was out in the cold, clinging to life, you weren't doing chest compressions at 6:07 and 6:08, were you?
I was walking over when I was calling.
You were calling your sister on the phone, weren't you, Ms. McCabe?
I was calling them to see if they would come out, but I was going right over to work on him.
And you could have walked the 25 feet to the front door, walked in the house, and screamed for Brian Albert to come out and help you in those precious seconds and minutes, couldn't you?
That would have taken me away from helping John, getting Kerry blankets, giving him compressions.
And making those 2 very important phone calls at 6:07 and 6:08 that you say were not answered, correct?
They were not important phone calls. I tried to call my sister, and then I focused on John.
They were not important phone calls, but they were important enough for you to make while John is clinging to life right there in front of you, right?
As I was walking over, I called to see if she would answer.
And she didn't answer. Let's talk about that. She didn't answer according to you. So if we're going to talk about it, we're beyond the luncheon break? Your Honor, I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
And I'll wrap it.
Okay.
Let's talk about that real quick.
Sure.
She didn't answer the phone, did she?
No, she didn't.
So you have a situation where a man is laying dead or dying in the front yard of your sister's house. You see nothing in terms of life inside the house. Lights aren't coming on. They're not getting up. They're certainly not coming outside, right?
They were sound asleep
They weren't coming outside, were they?
because they were asleep.
You didn't know if they were asleep. All you knew was there was a severely injured man on the front lawn of their house, and your sister didn't answer the phone, not once, but twice, correct?
Correct, she didn't answer the phone.
Did you think your sister might have been in peril? Did you think to go inside the house and check that they're okay?
I had no reason to think that they weren't okay.
You had no reason to believe they weren't okay. A man was dead or dying on their lawn, and your sister's not answering the phone. And nobody is coming out to the chaos of Karen Reed screaming on the front lawn. You didn't think there was some reason to believe they could have been in peril?
I didn't, because your client was screaming she hit him. She had a cracked taillight. She was crying she hit him. I didn't, but my focus... Can I finish, please?
You had solved the crime right then and there. You solved the whole case.
No, I didn't. I knew John never came in the house, so I had no concern for anyone's safety inside the house.
The reason you didn't go inside the house is because you knew better. You knew better. You knew she wasn't in peril. You knew that Brian Albert wasn't in peril. You weren't worried at all about them, were you?
I was not worried at all because something happened on the front lawn that had nothing to do with anything inside that house.
You weren't worried about them at all because you knew what really happened, didn't you?
So why doesn't Brian Albert come out of the house? Why does he go to such great lengths to try to pretend like they didn't know anything was happening? And where's Chloe, who we're being led to believe never makes a sound, even though she's sleeping right next to his bed, by his side, in the bedroom, which overlooks the front lawn? Okay. Now, of course, in reality, Chloe was removed from the scene. I don't know if Chloe was murdered, if she was shot on sight, if Caitlin Albert, which is maybe the more likely scenario, the eldest daughter of these two, whose boyfriend comes and picks her up around 2 a.m. that morning, in all likelihood, the two of them take the dog with them, because there is no dog in this house. No dog is ever seen. No dog is ever heard. And these two idiots both claim that Chloe was there. She just never made a sound. Now, we also learn from Nicole Albert on the stand that this dog has gotten out of the gate before to attack other animals, other dogs, and had a history of biting people.
She's a large German Shepherd.
Yep, about 70 pounds. No, she did not like other dogs.
Ms. Albert, Chloe has injured other humans, hasn't she?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. In one incident in May of 22, when she got out and was fighting with another dog, the woman whose dog it was tried to break up the two dogs, and while she was trying to break up the two dogs, she got injured.
And you mentioned that Chloe had actually escaped from the backyard in that incident.
Yes.
And that happens from time to time at your house, correct?
It had happened a few times, yes.
And Mr. Albert let Chloe out when he arrived that night, correct?
Yep.
And this, by the way, is very part and parcel to how German Shepherds behave. And that's not to crap on German Shepherds. That is coming from a dog expert who has explained that German Shepherds were bred very specifically to be defense dogs. And as a result, in their DNA, even German Shepherds who have no bite history, who've never been aggressive, can all of a sudden one day shoot out the front door and attack the postal worker. It would not be at all unusual to imagine that Chloe could have escaped the front yard, particularly if she knew that there was some kind of a violent altercation taking place in the front of the house, say, for example, on, in or around the garage. For those of you that have not seen John O'Keefe's injuries, I cannot show them here, or YouTube will not show you this video. But if you look up, attached here is a link to a video that I did in a way that is acceptable to YouTube, where you can take a much closer look at John O'Keefe's injuries, and you will see his arm, and you will compare his arm to other dog attacks, and you will see that there's absolutely no question whatsoever that John O'Keefe was bit and scratched by a dog. It isn't even a question. Okay? It is not a question.
children, because why else is she in my bedroom at 6:30 in the morning right now?
And what did she tell you?
She said, John's out front. I think John's dead out front.
So he forgot the rehearsed statement there and gets a little stuck, but tries to recover.
I said, what the are you talking about, Jen? And I'm like, who? I didn't know.
You still didn't piece it
I
together.
didn't understand what she was talking about, because why would John be out front of my house?
So massively confusing. There are police officers, EMTs on your front lawn. You're an officer. Why don't you just go outside and investigate or take a look?
I'm not a Canton police officer. I'm a Boston police officer. I was just woken up out of a cold sleep from...
You'll notice that he doesn't use the word dead sleep, right? You notice that he doesn't use the word dead sleep. I mean, that is how calculated Brian Albert is. He has already anticipated being asked this question. This is the rehearsed statement, and he was careful not to use the word woken out of a dead sleep because of how it would sound, because of the optics of that, because of how inconsiderate that might sound to somebody listening. So keep this in mind. This is how calculated Brian Albert is. Now, I have thought long and hard about why Brian Albert did not come out of his house that morning. And again, once I understood that John was dead immediately following the altercation at the house, things began to get a little bit more clear. You have to understand that to understand what has happened in this case. You have to understand John was dead. He died immediately, and they panicked. These drunk people who had been drinking all day, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were drinking all day. They get back from New York City around 6 p.m. They go out to eat. They start drinking. They continue the party at the waterfall. They get there around 10 p.m. They keep drinking. Brian Higgins, you can see on the waterfall video, is rubbing his eyes. He looks like, he's about to fall over. And of course, Brian Albert has a history, as per his wife, of fighting when he's drunk, of actually beating up other police officers when he's drunk, one of whom is Eddie Hernandez, who he mentions being with earlier that day.
My personal theory is this. These guys were drunk. Fight happened. An oh shit moment happened. They panicked. They didn't know what to do. I believe the owner of the house, right, has a checkered past, right? I said in a live not too long ago, a live stream, John O'Keefe, his bruises, had the calling card of Brian Albert. And what did I mean by that? Brian Albert has beaten several Boston cops physically, off duty, drinking. He was a sergeant of a high-speed fugitive apprehension unit. Okay.
Okay.
Now, my belief is he had a black book. Hey, listen, all cops keep a book, right? Especially if you're corrupt.
What is the book?
The book basically is, okay, on such and such a date, I did a favor for this high-end official. On such and such a date, I used specialized equipment that I shouldn't have used to wiretap a person for a political whatever. Right?
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So my theory is that after this thing went down and it's the oh shit moment that they can't get out of, he made a phone call to someone to say, if I go down, we're all going down.
So these two are men who have been known to get drunk and fight. Okay. Now, having said that, once you understand that John is dead, you understand the motives of the people in the house. So why doesn't Brian Albert come out? Because in some way you might be able to argue that it looks worse for him that he doesn't come out of the house, because it is so unbelievable for any of us to imagine that this guy, being who he is, doesn't know that this whole group, that all this ruckus is happening on his front lawn and never comes out of the house. It's so unimaginable, particularly because they have an alert dog. They have a freaking German Shepherd sleeping next to him. If a German Shepherd was upstairs in that bedroom window, on the other side of the bedroom window, you would have heard the barking on the dash cam video. That dog was not in the house, okay? The reason that Brian Albert does not come outside is because John O'Keefe is already dead. So what is he going to do? Think about the situation that puts Brian Albert in. So as a well-trained first responder who was a former Marine and spent 30 years working for the Boston Police Department, he's going to come outside, find John O'Keefe's dead body, and what? Pretend like he doesn't know he's dead? Right? Like, what is he going to do in that situation? Because he's kind of damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. He can't tell the other medics, he can't tell the other first responders that he has no pulse, right? Because then he knows that incriminates him. If you've ever watched any Dateline episode, oftentimes the first people at the scene are considered suspects. And he would have been smart enough to see that, of course, if he's the guy that runs out of the house, everyone's going to say, well, he was the first one to touch the body. Of course he was involved, right? So that's number one. Number two, okay, let's say we get past that because, you know, the truth is they could have got past that because Karen Reed was on scene. In other words, they're the ones that found him. It would have been Jennifer Mccabe running into the house, getting him, right? And having him run down to be the first responder, the first person on the scene to try to resuscitate John O'Keefe. The problem with that is John was already dead. So what is this guy going to do? He's going to say to the other medics, he's going to say to the other first responders that show up, the firefighters, the paramedics on the scene, I've been trying to do chest compressions and his chest is hard as a rock. He's clearly dead. He had been dead for 6 hours, you guys. He was dead a very long time. And it would have been obvious to any of these people, right? I'm sure it was obvious to the first responders who are probably not wanting to say, well, I knew he was dead when I got there. They also know that there are other cases where somebody is left outside, does have hypothermia, and is resuscitated. So they would have known that too. And it would have been very hard because they would have been using his temperature as part of the determination about his life or death. Would have been very hard for them to determine that. But my guess is within seconds of arriving at the hospital, the people at the hospital knew he was dead. Nobody's ever come back from being dead after 7 hours, right? So Brian Albert, knowing that, really was not able to come out of the house, right? He would have been then obviously a part of the narrative in some way that he knew he couldn't be. And that is the reason why he never comes out of the house. But if you don't understand that John was dead, then it doesn't make sense because, of course, if they had known that a man could have been saved, of course, Brian Albert would have come out of the house to try to save him. But these guys, the whole time, were trying to cover the fact that he was murdered. He was murdered. And because Chloe was directly involved, Brian Albert had some level of culpability. But I personally do not believe that Brian Albert was the aggressor. I believe that Chloe got out of the backyard because she sensed aggression in the front of the house, that Brian Higgins and John O'Keefe were fighting. Now, some other indicators of a fight were not only John's injuries, which again, you can review in more depth in the video that I made about his injuries. Let's say Brian Higgins, we know, wants to talk to John. He's trying to get John to come to the house. We see him on the waterfall video. We see him pointing and saying, you, come on, let's go. We know he texts him, are you coming here? In all reality, Brian Higgins is probably waiting outside. We also know from the lies that Nicole Albert, Brian Higgins and Brian Albert tell on the stand that there's a lot of lying about who came into the house, when, and in what order. Brian Higgins does not come into the house when Nicole and Brian Albert walk in. Brian Higgins, in all likelihood, is waiting outside to try to grab John, to try to have a conversation with him about the text messages between him and Karen. Now, I don't know whether Brian would have just immediately wanted to start fighting with John, because I think John would have probably been very surprised. I think he was completely clueless about any of this. And I don't think that he perceived correctly what Brian Higgins was trying to communicate to him at the waterfall. I think he just thought it was in jest, like, ha, 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 that kind of thing. So, and Karen clearly was just oblivious to all of this, had no idea. And, you have to ask the question, what in God's name, why would Karen think it was okay to leave John alone with Brian Higgins? I have no idea what the thinking was there, but clearly she did not sense the reality or the danger in the situation. So Brian Higgins is likely waiting outside. And again, the reason I say that is not just a hunch, is because he does not go into the house when these two go in. Okay. He comes in later. So he comes in after them, but he arrives first. So he's one of the first people to drive and get to the house. And then he comes in after the fact. So in all likelihood, he's waiting outside for John and Karen to arrive. Karen doesn't see it because of wherever she parks. She's not paying attention to where John goes, which door. She's just not paying attention to where he goes once he leaves the car. So potentially he could have either walked directly into the garage without realizing that it was a garage, because there's 3 doors, right? Who the hell knows which one to go into?
And Ms. Mccabe, just staying with doors for a second, is there another door associated with the garage?
Oh, actually, yeah, there is. Right there.
Right there next to that side door.
Yes.
Okay.
Or very likely Brian Higgins is waiting for him and grabs him to have a conversation about the text messages, which quickly, devolves into a fight. And John O'Keefe is eventually propelled backwards, hitting his head and dying almost immediately. Brian Higgins was a trained tactical medic. He tries desperately to save John's life.
And as you drive past that flagpole with everything lit up and everything in your peripheral vision, you still didn't see a body on that lawn, did you?
I did not.
You're a former firefighter, is that right?
Yes.
Did that put you in a position of being a first responder?
Yes.
And you're currently a law enforcement officer?
Yes.
That puts you in the position of being a first responder, correct?
I'm also a tactical medic, yes.
Which means that you have training to be an observer. You're a trained observer, more than the average person, correct?
Yes.
You look for things out of the ordinary. You look for things that don't belong. As an investigator and former firefighter.
Watch as his face begins to change. Watch as the reactions on his face begin to indicate shifts in his emotions, in how he feels.
First responder, correct?
Yes.
And you did not see a 217-pound man bleeding out on the side of the road, in the lawn, or in the yard, just to your right by that flagpole, correct?
If I did,
I didn't ask
I would have
you
done
if you
something
did.
to help him.
I asked you if you saw one.
No, I did not.
And that's because there was no body there, correct?
I didn't see anything.
Because if there was a body there, you certainly would have seen that.
Objection.
Guilt, shame, deep sadness, remorse, as does Brian Albert. And we get that from Brian Albert right here.
Police officer. I was just woken up out of a cold sleep from hanging out the night before. By the time I came downstairs, the police were already in my house. John was already gone. There was nobody to save. I would have taken a bullet for John O'Keefe because he was a fellow cop. That's the most ridiculous question that people always ask. It made zero sense. What am I supposed to do? Run out front in my underwear and start running yellow tape around the fire hydrant?
So here's the truth in what he just said, and it's really telling. This part is true. John O'Keefe was already gone. What was I supposed to do? Brian Albert gives it away here when he tells us John O'Keefe was already gone. He was already dead by the time I came outside. And he's probably telling the truth. He probably would have taken a bullet for John. He did not want John O'Keefe to die. None of these people did. I believe wholeheartedly Jennifer McCabe had a crush on John. I think she had deep feelings for him. I think she had a crush on him. The fact that he had taken in his niece and nephew. John was an attractive guy. Jen, was there a lot of the time to help with the kids, and, his daughter or his niece and her daughter were friendly. She did help John a lot. They were friends. And I think she liked John. So these are not murderers in the sense that they had any intent whatsoever to kill John, but they made a very, very big mistake. For the life of me, probably if they weren't drunk and didn't panic, they would have made the right decision, which would have been for Brian Albert and Brian Higgins to just say that it was a total accident, but they didn't want to suffer the consequences. Obviously, they were scared and they did something very, very stupid. Now, a couple other things about the details of what happens this night. Number one, there's no blood, and that head wound would have created blood all over the place. The head wound would have created blood all over the place. Number one. Number two, there's vomit all over the front of John's clothes. Now, if he had just died from a fall and there was no fight before, he could not have vomited on the front of his clothing, right? That's not how it works. In fact, again, from working in substance use disorders for many years, people pass away from alcohol overdose because they pass out and vomit and then choke on their own vomit. That's not what happened here. So why would he have vomit all over the front of him? Oh, because he was fighting, and in that fight, vomited all over himself, and then was propelled backwards and hit his head and died.
Over the course of the night, Reed called and texted John 52 times. She then called Jen asking for help to find John. Karen previously telling me she and John had gotten into an argument that night.
All right, so let's talk about Karen's behavior, because a couple of things. There's a couple of things here. Now, I had somebody on a live last night say that they think John was hanging out and partying for a few hours before he was killed. Based on his behavior with Karen earlier in the day and throughout the month prior to his death, we get a lot of insight about the way that John would react to Karen's anxious attachment disorder. So what does that mean? I hate the word disorder, so let's just call it anxious attachment style. So Karen is an anxious person in a relationship. That's why she would accuse John of cheating, right? She was always looking for more validation, more of his time, more of his attention. And for John, that was tough because he was an avoidant attachment style, which meant that when he gets emotional, he shuts down. He doesn't tell his feelings easily. And Karen was looking for that. So there was this constant push and pull going on between the two of them, which typically results, in not a great ending for everybody involved, right? Essentially, what it means is that these two folks can never get their needs met. Karen can never get her needs met from John because he's avoidant. And John is going to be constantly badgered by Karen in a way that he can't tolerate because he's avoidant. He doesn't want to deal with her anxiety, and it's overwhelming to him. And then when he tries to say, I need time to calm down, she can't tolerate that. So she keeps chasing, and that just drives him further away. And that was the extent. That was everything about their relationship indicates that. Karen very predictably expected John to go in the house and tell her what was going on. And when he didn't, she flipped out. And the immediate assumption from Karen, who was intoxicated at the time, was that the same thing that had happened on New Year's Eve, not even a month earlier, was happening on this night. On New Year's Eve, Karen was in Aruba with John's niece and nephew and about 25 of John's friends. Friends, like, yeah, friends. I don't think there was a lot of family. It was friends. So on New Year's Eve, John had been drinking all day. He wanted to watch one of the bowl games. And Karen was upstairs in the hotel room with his niece and nephew, waiting for him to come back. And he never comes back. So she ends up going to look for him. And he ends up, when she finds him, kind of like, hugging or in an embrace with this young, flirty girl that he knows, a friend's sister. And Karen, thinks that they're kissing, that they're in some kind of an embrace that's inappropriate. She goes nuts all over the girl, calls her all these names, and ends up paying for her room as a result, feeling bad about the way she behaved. But the important detail for our purposes here is to understand that Karen immediately jumped to the same assumption on this night, that John was drinking, left her, abandoned her to go party with his friends, forgot about her, and was going to leave her to take care of his niece, which is exactly the same scenario that they were in on New Year's Eve. And Karen's chief complaint, because they were fighting all day that day, up until 9 p.m. when Karen Reed walks into C.F. McCarthy's, the two of them are bickering back and forth. Now, it begins to come to some resolution later in the day. John cools down, but they had started that morning in a bad place. They got into immediately a fight over Karen getting the kids, his niece and nephew, Dunkin' Donuts, John saying that she spoiled them. This is all old stuff, that was coming up, frustrations that had been long in the works for both of them, and both stressed in life for different reasons. Karen has lots of medical issues. John was clearly in over his head as a single dad with, his niece and nephew. So their conversations throughout that day, all day, indicate that Karen, her MO was to get upset at John and constantly badger him, to call constantly, text constantly, until she would get a resolution. And that is very textbook of somebody with an anxious attachment. But John's reaction to that was also pretty consistent. He wouldn't just leave her hanging, right? In each case, his first reaction was to text back, listen, Karen, not right now. I'm in the middle of something. Or, I can't do this right now. Give me 15 minutes, or I'll call you back in a half hour. He would never just not respond. And with Karen calling and texting, there is no evidence of John O'Keefe at any point just completely ignoring her. And he would have known that would have sent her into this outer space, particularly given the circumstances of him walking into a party. So the idea that John was partying with the Alberts and McCabes and just ignoring Karen Reed is just not what happened. So it's just not. That's not what happened. There's no chance of that. Not unless somebody took his phone and was holding him hostage. Like, as long as he had his phone, there's no chance of that happening. Now, we also know there was no activity on John's phone after 12:32. And when you look at all the activity up until then, it doesn't make sense that all activity would just stop on the phone at 12:32, that he wasn't picking up his phone, that the light wasn't going on, that no time he looked at his phone at all after 12:32. To me, that indicates that something happened almost immediately.
There have been threats to your lives. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Whether it's phone calls, text messages, emails, crazy Unabomber type letters to people's houses.
Brian believes the targeting of witnesses in this case sets a dangerous precedent.
And what's the blueprint?
The blueprint is pick out witnesses, destroy their reputations, attack them, malign them, torture their kids, torture anybody that ever knew them, make them not testify. And while doing so, taint the jury pool.
Nicole, you've been very quiet throughout the interview.
Yeah, I'm just very sad. What has happened to all of us? It's just heartbreaking.
All right. So I've just said a lot. I have just brought a lot of you up to speed, at least as to What I suspect to have been true here and why it is, the truth about why it is that those of us that believe this group of people are 100% responsible for John's passing. Number one, that it wouldn't have been with the intent to kill him. It was simply a fight that started out, in all likelihood, over a girl, over Karen Reed. And the reason, to me, what made this so evil and so nefarious is the fact that they turned around knowing that they had knowing that she had no involvement. They turned around and tried to put this on Karen Reed because Brian Higgins saw an opportunity to do so. Now, I did not go into all the reasons why I believe that Brian Higgins is guilty. Brian Higgins, to me, is 100% guilty, or at least holds himself responsible for John O'Keefe's death. You should also know that immediately following John's wake, Brian Higgins has had absolutely no interaction with the McAlberts at all, to the point where at one point, Matt McCabe is caught sending a text message where he's evidencing some kind of concern about the fact that Brian Higgins is distancing himself from them. So that's interesting, worth noting. You should also know that it was Brian Higgins who signed a proffer agreement with the feds and discloses the fact that it was Michael Morrissey who requested that he and Brian Albert destroy their cell phones just before the order to protect those phones, to look at evidence, came down. That's a day before the defense had, or the judge had agreed that the defense could investigate those phones. So it was Brian out. So to me, Brian Higgins is the weaker link. He is the one who feels incredibly bad about what happened to John. And we know that from a very careful and close examination of his testimony. So there are videos in the library on that. You can check them out if you want to know more about Brian Higgins's role in all of this. Everybody enjoy all of this post Karen Reed coverage. There's an endless sea to go through. Enjoy it. Enjoy your weekend. And I will see you again very soon.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything.